Well, good morning, everybody. We live in an addicted society. It's pretty clear when you read the news and you see things about the opioid crisis. This idea that people are just taking medication, doing all sorts of things all the time, stealing drugs. Of course, you know about the drug epidemic and how the whole idea of meth here in Southwest Michigan is pretty much an epidemic. Of course, there's alcohol abuse. We see it all over the place. There's sexual addictions. We see that in the news. We see people, men who have been just really unbelievably just bad in their behavior around women. There's pornography addictions. There's people who are just stuck to that kind of stuff. There's gambling. People who just don't just gamble socially, but it becomes an addiction into their life. You name it, there's just so many addictions. But here's the one thing that all of us have in common. All of us have someone in our life that's dealing with an addiction, whether they've identified it or not. But that someone might be you, might be me. Ministers aren't, we're subject to addictions just like anyone else is. But all of us have the same issues, the same problems. And so the TV show This Is Us is what we're sort of loosely basing this series on. And in this series, they talk about the struggle that happens in one of the characters in their addiction. So we thought it would be good today to just spend some time talking about that subject with you. So what is an addiction? Well, I like the definition that Dr. Henry Cloud came up with, and you're probably familiar with him. He's the Cloud of Cloud and Townsend. They're a really incredible psychologist. Here's what Henry says about addictions. Here's how he defines it. He says an addiction is a compulsive physiological need for something. In other words, something that someone needs to survive. That is so interesting because something that might start out small ends up getting its hook into us. And when it gets its hook into us, it's almost like we need it to survive. Whatever it is, I need that drink, I need that drug, I need that thing. Whatever it is, it pulls you, it grabs onto you. What do you do with those kinds of things? The interesting thing about addiction is that so oftentimes we try to treat the symptoms, but we don't deal with the core. It's like if you go to see the doctor and you say, Doc, I really need some medication for this pain I'm experiencing in my foot. The doctor's not going to ask you what medications you're allergic to. The doctor's going to do what? A good doctor will look at the foot. What's the source of the problem? The source of all addictions is an emptiness inside of us. I love what Blaise Pascal said. He's a mathematician, theologian from the 17th century. Here's what he said about this emptiness that all of us experience. Here's what he says. When else does this craving and this helplessness proclaim? He's giving a defense of Christianity. He said, but that there was once in man a true happiness, of which all that now remains is the empty print and trace. This he tries in vain to fill with everything around him, seeking in things that are not there the help he cannot find in those that are, though none can help, since this infinite abyss can be filled only with infinite and immutable object, in other words, by God himself. There's a hole in all of us that's built for God in your life. You know my story. Many of you do. I came to know the Lord and really crossed the line of faith by getting into a financial situation in my early 20s that was beyond my ability to get over. That was my crossing point. That wasn't my starting point. To understand my starting point, you got to go back to a 13-year-old kid who was in ninth grade who started smoking pot and started taking drugs at 13. Was raised in a middle-class family. My parents didn't drink or smoke. They didn't do drugs. I just had a pretty normal middle-class Lansing, Michigan upbringing. But I got into smoking pot. You say, why'd you get into smoking pot at 13? Well, I couldn't buy beer. You couldn't hide the fact that you were a 13-year-old at the beer store. But I could buy pot. So I started smoking pot. Well, then when that wasn't enough, I started taking any kind of pills you could get. I mean, you name it, I took it. Acid, speed. I never shot heroin, but I smoked it in pot. I would mix it with pot and smoke it. I spent a lot of years clouding. Then I drank. Some of you are social drinkers, and you just drink socially, but I never drank socially, never once. Never once drank not to get drunk. The fact that I'm here, standing before you, even having a chance to talk like this, is amazing. I should be dead. I drank at certain times in my life so much alcohol that I blacked out for hours. Drove a car. Did things I don't know I did. So badly that it sometimes took days for the alcohol to get out of my system. What was I doing? I was trying to fill the emptiness on the inside of me. I don't know what it caused it. The more I thought about it, I think, well, maybe it was because I was seeking approval from my family that I didn't get. My parents, although they were as good to me as they could, they were pretty disengaged in my life. I don't know why, but I remember as a kindergartner, my mother telling me that the cereal was here in the cupboard and the bowl was here. When you go to school, make your own breakfast. I pretty much did my own thing from the time I was 4 years old. I tried to fill this emptiness with something that I didn't know Blaise Pascal back then, nor did I know Jesus. As I began my spiritual journey in my late teens, early 20s, I had a number of people who would always talk to me about Christ, about this idea of being born again. And then I came across one day, I would get drunk, wasted. I would come home and read the Bible. Read the Bible. Searching for answers. Because I hated my life. I was successful in business. I had lots of money. By this time, I was into cocaine. I loved cocaine. I didn't like to share cocaine with people because it was so expensive. I just liked to do it myself. I would buy it, snort it, all by myself, thinking that was normal. Then I'd read my Bible. And then I came across this verse in Romans 7 and 15. Here's what it says. By the way, that's me. I don't really understand myself, for I want to do what is right, but I don't do it. Instead, I do what I hate. When I read that, I couldn't believe that somebody wrote those words about my life 2,000 years ago. I don't understand myself. I want to do what's right, but I can't. I do what I hate. That began my journey, my spiritual journey. It took me a while to finally get to a point where I surrendered my life, and when I did, I'm telling you what, I am a creature of what 2 Corinthians 5:17 says. Listen to this verse. This is my life. This means that if anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. The old life is gone. A new life has begun. You know, I don't even think about my old life. I don't even think about those days of drinking and drugs and all just the junk that goes with all of that. Why is that? Because I'm a new creature in Christ. That was so long ago. That wasn't even me. That guy died on the cross with Jesus. It's just the reality of a new life. And you say, why is that so important? Listen, before you go any farther, you need to know, whatever you might be stuck in, there is hope for you. There is hope for you. Whatever the situation is. So I've asked a couple of people to share with us today and their sort of journeys that will help us to connect with this. The first is John Martin. John's our outreach director here at the church. He oversees our thrift store, oversees our Friday groceries, and many of our outreaches here. Let's take a look at John's story.
So John, tell me your story. Tell me about your life.
Well, I was adopted when I was 10 days old to a very loving family. My dad was a pastor. My mom was back then was a nurse, but she was also the church secretary, organist, and had a very loving home growing up. And grew up in church and was pretty much in church 3-4 times a week. In teenage years, I got rebellious. Was smoking pot a lot and playing around with other stuff, but became very successful in business at a pretty young age. And so by my mid-20s, I was on a very fast track to an executive level position. And by the time I was 29, I was a vice president of operations for a large company in Kalamazoo here, and had everything by the world standards that you could ever want at that age. Somewhere along the line, I simply felt there was something missing. There was a component that just wasn't there. And I don't remember where I was or exactly who I was with, but I smoked meth for the first time. From the very second I inhaled, I was a full-blown addict, full-blown. And within 2-3 weeks, I had completely blown my career. Over a period of the next 6 years, I had bankrupted us, literally. I had blown through my pensions, my 401k, and Kathy stuck by me through all of this. And I suddenly realized during that 6-year period how dark a hole I was in, and how when you're in that place, everything that happens to everybody around you is just collateral damage. You don't process the fact that you're really destroying people's lives. Addiction's a very selfish thing. And the thing with addiction is, I remember telling my sister-in-law one day, it's like, I've never known anybody in my life that woke up one morning and said, starting today, I'm gonna be a meth addict. And then I can't wait to start smoking crack because I'm gonna be a crack addict. So these weren't goals that I had.
Yeah, sure.
Addiction, when it hits you hard, right, and it takes you down.
And like you say, typically destroys the relationships all around you. Because don't you think one of the things about addiction is you do become very self-centered. Mm-hmm. And like you're kind of like you're describing is you don't care about the people around you. I mean, you say you do, but you don't, because your actions would speak otherwise, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the actions speak much louder than words. And in over that period of 6 years, I mean, I had family and friends just go, like literally walk away from him. My best friend, the guy that was best man at my wedding, he sat me down one day and he said, look, man, we can't deal with you anymore. And he said, don't come to our house, don't call us, we're done. And he really did it out of love. Yeah. But he was at the point where he just couldn't help me because I wasn't looking for help yet. And so, during this time, I would have moments of clarity where I couldn't score, couldn't get high. It's like, oh my gosh, I've really screwed my life up, And then I would have that clarity of realizing that I had hurt my wife, yeah, and that I had destroyed the relationships at the core with my kids, my friends, my family, my extended family. And the only way that I could process that at that time was to go out and get high again.
So you're in a dark, empty, lonely, isolated place. How'd you get out of it? What happened?
I had quite a day. I was working at a car dealership, and 3 times that day I had my crack dealer come up and bring me $150 each time. And so I would go out to one of the used vans, and I smoked $450 worth of crack that day.
In one day?
In one day. And by the time I left work, I was out. And I ended up at the bar, stopped at the bar and had a couple drinks with the guys at work. And I'll never forget, I ordered 2 Long Island iced teas and a Bud Light. And I drank them in about 5-10 minutes, completely blacked out, and drove home. And when I got home, my mother-in-law had given me a bowl. And I was looking for something in the cupboard, probably crack that I had hidden or something, but I ended up slamming the cupboard door and it shattered this bowl. And at that point, I had just melted down, like literally melted down. I turned around and I just slid down to the floor against the Lazy Susan in the corner of the kitchen. And as clear as I'm talking to you, God said to me, John Martin, it's your choice, live or die, but make it right now. Not tomorrow, right now. And I said, I don't want to die. And he said, do you want a hand up? And I said, I do. And I put my hand up, and it's like he pulled me up from the ground, and I went straight to the phone, picked it up, called the best friend that walked away from me, and I said, I need you to take me to the hospital. And so he came out, picked me up right away, and I went into the hospital in Paw Paw and gave him all the paraphernalia, all the drugs I could find in a bag, slid it through the window, and so I went and sat in the waiting room and picked up the New Testament, or the Bible that they have on the thing there, and I was looking for a particular verse in Matthew, and I knew what it was, and I knew roughly where it was. It was Matthew 11:28. Come to me, those of you that are burdened and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And I read that verse, and I just said, God, I got to have that rest. I can't do this. I simply can't do it. And I owned it right there. And I just said, Lord, you tell me what you want me to do for the rest of my life, and I will follow whatever direction you take me. But I'm done with this. Well, the minute I did this, the other thing I'd asked God to do was to take away from me any desire to ever get high again. And it was instantaneous. I ended up at Borges, finally about 4:30 in the morning, checked me in, shut me into this room at the lockdown psychiatric ward, and I was so peaceful. And I remember laying there, and God just spoke to my heart and said, you're going to be okay. And I woke up 5 hours later, stone sober. It was amazing. I mean, it was absolute peace. And they brought me in, and they said, well, we'll wean you off the Xanax, we'll give you Neurontin to help with the nerve issues. And I'm like, nope, you're not giving me anything. I'm done. And so they didn't. And I mean, I was just done.
That's a miracle, isn't it?
It is. I had to trust God completely, completely, with every part of my life.
So what happened after that?
When I got out of the hospital 3 days later, the first thing I did was call my dad and say, will you go to church with me on Saturday? And he said, absolutely. But he and my mom both got to see this radical transformation in my life. And they got to see me go into ministry. So when I hit 99.5, I mean, I was there at 4:30 waiting for the doors to open every single Saturday. And immediately did getting a grip on the basics. I mean, I was just hungry because I knew now what that void was. Right. All of a sudden, I had what I was looking for. And I wanted more of it, and I wanted all of it, but I had to trust God. And one of my other favorite verses is, be still and know that I am God. And just trust him and give him your life. There is hope. He could pull me out of that and change my life and restore to me everything that I had destroyed. Restored my marriage, restored relationships with my kids, and it's been an unbelievable journey.
Thanks, John. Appreciate you sharing your story with us. It's powerful. Think, well, here's the problem with this. So often we try to convince ourselves we don't have a problem. There's a verse about that too in 1 Corinthians 6:12. Here's what it says. You say, the Bible says, you say, I am allowed to do anything. In other words, I got the power, I can do it. But not everything is good for you. And even though I am allowed to do anything, I must not become a slave to anything. That word slave means to be controlled by or brought under the power of. Problem with addictions is we think we don't have them. We think we're fine. But really what has happened is we've allowed ourselves to become under the power of something other than God. And when that happens, it becomes an addictive behavior. The next little video clip I want to show you is an interview I did with our dear friend Casey Tree. Casey pastors Christian Faith Center in Seattle, Washington, a church of well over 10,000, several campuses. They've been at this, he and Wendy, for over 38 years now in ministry. But he didn't start in ministry. He started his life as a young adult as a drug addict. In fact, let me have Casey tell you his story. Hey, Casey, I love you. Thanks for being willing to share with us today on this topic of addiction. And so, just so you know, I've already shared with the congregation who you are and your background. But talk to me a little bit about, if you can, about maybe some things that might have triggered you to become in the whole drug scene.
Yeah, I was a teenager, and I think I started out kind of feeling like having fun, be cool, be in the crowd. But my parents were divorced when I was 17, 18. That said to me, there's no right or wrong. Because I wasn't a Christian, I didn't go to church, I didn't have the word. They were my standard, they were my right and wrong. So when my parents were divorced, it was like, well, I guess anything goes. You just do what you feel. And man, it wasn't long after that divorce, I was full on drugs, morning, noon, and night, just how do I medicate my life full time? So I really think that was the beginning, that sense of hopelessness and no direction, no foundation, right?
Yeah, we all need that. And in the family, like in your case, your family was your foundation. So when that thing crumbled, what have you got to stand on?
And I was older, right? I wasn't like a little kid.
Right.
But man, it just took the foundation out, and I was full on whatever I could get to stay drunk or stay high every day.
So what was what sort of caused you to make a turnaround? Was it just getting in trouble with it, or how did that all turn around?
It doesn't take long, and you begin to feel out of control, and it's like, no, I really can't stop this. By the time I was 19, I was feeling like, man, I got to get it together. I got to come up with another plan here. This is not working. So I tried to stop. I tried going to counseling, and I started feeling very hopeless and, hopeless and helpless. And so then I was getting arrested. I would get DUIs. I would get caught at a party somewhere, and it started escalating. I started carrying weapons and getting into bigger drug deals. So everything started getting beyond my control very quick. And luckily, I had a probation officer who had been a drug addict, and he said, I know you, man. I know where you're at, and I know what it's going to take. And he connected me with Julius Young, who became my spiritual father. Julius had a rehab center, and I just checked in there. Now, when I first checked in, the judge told me, if you leave, you're going to jail. So that was a good motivation to stay in rehab. But after a few weeks, then I became a Christian. The things he was saying started making sense. And I started to feel like maybe I could make it. Maybe I could overcome and actually have a future. And the biggest thing that I remember, Jeff, was feeling hope. I think I called it vision or a dream. I'd lost all of that. Drugs took all the hope out of my life, all the vision. And as a young person, I should have been excited about going to college, having a career, finding a wife. I had none of those things until I became a Christian, started going to church, got connected at church, and I started to have a vision for life again.
So when you got help, and then went to the rehab center. Was there any relapse in any of that, or was there a time where you just really felt you got free of it?
It took me quite a while to believe I could make it, that I could stay clean, that I could stay free from drugs. Then meeting Wendy, starting to talk about church life and a vision as a Christian and Christian leadership, all of that then started to become bigger. I don't think you can stop being a drug addict. I think you have to start being something else.
Oh, that's good.
You don't stop thinking about the old world. You start thinking about a new world. And I've always realized if I try not to think about something, I just get more and more connected to it. But if I get focused on something new, a new vision, a new dream, a new hope, then that energy and that, I believe the Holy Spirit starts helping us and moving us toward that. God said, set your mind on things above. He did not tell us, don't set your mind on these other things. He just said, set your mind on things above. And I think then the Lord starts drawing us that way.
Aren't you glad that we serve a God of all hope, and He's the one who gives us that hope? So, in wrapping things up, then, Case, what would you say, in a word of encouragement to folks that are watching us right now, who maybe are feeling a little bit hopeless when they've tried to break this addiction, they tried to break a bad habit? What kind of word would you give them to just give them some hope?
Yeah. So number one, get around church life. Right? Get around church family. Be in services. When you hear Pastor Jeff, you're hearing hope. You're seeing someone who's overcome. You're with someone who is doing it, and you need to be around that. You become like the people that you hang around. So be in church life. The second thing is keep setting your mind on that promise from God. Maybe God's promise to you is you're a new creation. Old things pass away, and all things have become new. You've got to set your mind there. You've got to practice focusing on that promise of God, on that hope from God, on that vision from God, and keep moving. I've climbed Mount Rainier a couple times. I fell down on the mountain several times, but I didn't roll all the way to the bottom. I just got back up and kept climbing. So you may stumble, you may relapse, if you want to use that word, but you don't start over. You start again, and you just keep going, and God's for you. He's with you, and He'll continue to help you.
That's awesome. Casey, thank you. I love you, man. I appreciate what you shared. It's really going to help the folks that watch this. So I can't wait to see you again. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Jeff. Love you guys. Love you, church.
He said so many things there that are so important to grasp onto, and that idea of not trying to not think about something, but think about the right things. And he also, I think the other thing that I'm always reminded of when I'm around him is it is all about who you're hanging out with. And the relationships that you have with other people is so vitally important. After getting free from being a drug addict, the Lord really began to minister to him this verse in Romans 12:2. Here's what that verse says about renewing your mind. It goes like this: don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person, changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. Casey wrote a book on renewing your mind, this idea, this concept of changing the way you think. The last interview I did was with our friend Patrick Norris. Patrick and Tina have been friends of Beth and I for a couple of decades now, and Pat has done a lot of research on not only how you deal with things spiritually, but how you deal with things in your mind. And I wanted to talk to him a little bit about that and share that with you. So let's take a look at our interview I did with Patrick Norris. All right, Pat, talk to me a little bit about addictions. I know you've done a lot of studies on it, and kind of tell me what happens to somebody that finds themselves caught in something they can't get out of.
Yeah, sometimes whenever a person begins a behavior, they will, in the beginning of the behavior, make choices that begin to program the mind for, in its pleasure center, for a chemical release making them feel good. So at the beginning, it can be just, I felt good, I want to repeat that. But as they continue to repeat the behavior, it begins to galvanize or deepen the neural pathways of their brain so that it ultimately becomes an addiction. And an addiction is where you have a behavior that you desire to change, but you can't seem to manage. And so to look at the neural biology behind it, we're not just talking about character, we're not just talking about something spiritual, all those spiritual things are integrated into our whole lives. We're talking about something that has begun to develop in the brain so that a person is now living out of the brain's expression. So to think that we're going to change behavior without looking at what has happened to the brain would actually be irresponsible.
That's interesting, because I think most of us are geared to think, oh, gosh, if I was just a better person, if I could just get a better character, then I'd get free of this addiction. So when we talk about addictions, we're talking about things from drugs, alcohol, pornography, shopping, overeating, whatever it might be, right? Because when you talk about the release in the brain, that dopamine, that's really what happens, isn't it?
Absolutely, all of that. Any behavior that a person continues to do, that the end of it is destruction, that they can't seem to manage, that is an addiction.
Sure. Okay. So in your studies, because I know you've done a lot of research and you've really grown a lot in this personally, what are the ways that we then kind of can create new pathways of thinking? When you describe this, it makes me think that what you're describing is somebody that creates a way of thinking that's sort of a rut. It's just, we call it a lot of different things, but you just get in that rut. Like you say, you go from 0 to 100, you think, like, how did I get here? It's like, reminds me of what the Apostle Paul said. He said, in Romans, he says, I do the very thing I hate.
Great question. Well, first, I think what we have to do is quit repressing our emotions. Emotions are not good or bad. Sometimes we have talked about, I have these negative emotions. There are no negative emotions. Emotions are simply gauges on the dashboard that are communicating something to us. And so rather than repress them, turn away from them, ignore them, because they're uncomfortable. When they are uncomfortable, rather than turn to them, we often will say, I'm going to try to shut them down. And when we do, we take like a beach ball, we blow it up, and then we press it underwater and think that I can manage this by keeping it underwater. Well, anybody who's taken a beach ball knows that ball's coming out of the water.
Up, right.
Usually when you least expect it, and then water's going to fly everywhere.
Yeah.
And so when you have an emotion, you've got to turn into it. Lean into that emotion. Ask yourself, what is the emotion? So the first step of reprocessing the emotional brain is to identify the emotion. Believe it or not, we have data that shows that just by labeling what the emotion is begins the process of reprocessing.
Let me stop you there, Patrick, because here's a question for you. Because if people have a hard time understanding their own emotional, their own EQ, emotional quotient, where does counseling and or getting into a group of people that are dealing with the same thing, can that help you identify that?
It's radical. It's radical help. In fact, our surveys show that people who have come out of an intense recovery process and they maintained their freedom, they've maintained their recovery, are people that have 4 similar qualities. These are the top 4, and they are in sequence of priority. Number 1, a relationship with God was identified, even among secular people, as the primary component of their freedom. The second thing is having a group with a mentor who are moving in the same direction, fighting for the same things, who can be a part of the journey. The third thing is that you have good tools and training. And the good tools and training would happen because of your mentor. But the mentor and the group, and even the first piece, which is God, that's all about restoring intimacy. Because fear is driving the addiction. Fear is in the limbic brain, driving you to the unmanageable behavior. And what is going to destroy the fear is intimacy. So what we're really doing is we are remodeling your brain to say, I can be connected to people who love me, like me, or in a good mood to me, and I can be secure there. And then the fourth thing that people surveyed back was that they then gave back. Once they began to enjoy their recovery, they dedicated their lives to give back.
So, all right, so let's talk then two final things.
One, what does a person do who says, I got to get out of this? What's my first step?
I would encourage the first step is find somebody to help you. You can't do it alone. You're going to have to find, I would encourage a pastor to begin with, but you got to have somebody in your life who's going to encourage you, because we all stall out. That's just the nature of it. So you need to get, really, it depends on what your compulsive behavior is. If you're locked in an addiction that's destroying your life and relationships and dreams, you really are going to need to get a professional, because the professional is going to give you the training and the tools. It's like trying to screw in a screw in a board with the back end of a hammer.
Yeah.
You're frustrated and think, I can't do this. I just can't do it. I tried. I can't do it. It's impossible. Well, somebody who's standing by is thinking, if you just had a screwdriver, you'd be blown away how easy this is.
Yeah. All right. Finally, last thing, to give some hope to those that are with us today that maybe feel like they're a little bit hopeless. Give us some hope, Patrick.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what happens when you're stuck in addiction is you begin to identify as a failure. You begin to identify as a screw up. I just can't. I'm not enough. And I want you to know right out of the gate, you are enough. God's given you the capacity to live free. What you're really fighting with is not an addiction. Addiction is not you. And when people begin to think their addiction is them, they end up struggling with themselves. So the first piece of it is realizing that I am not my addiction. I don't live in the identity of shame, that I am lovable, likable, that I have the capacity to actually do this. All I need is I need the right people and the right tool. And if I have them, and understand, I have had some friendships with some people whose addictions had them so strung out, it looked literally impossible to everybody around them. And today they are years and years sober. And so I would encourage everybody listening that God has a plan for you. And just because you're still trying to screw in a screw with the back end of a hammer does not mean that that's all there is. God gets you when you don't get you. He loves you like you are in your brokenness. He's delighting in you right now, but he also has tools, a screwdriver, to help you live in the freedom that your heart dreams for.
Amen. Thanks, buddy. I love that. That gives me hope. I love it. So thanks for taking the time to come all this way and share with us like you did. And I love you. You're a good friend. You've been a good friend for a lot of years. Wish you God's best. And thanks for investing in the people here at Valley Family Church.
So what's our takeaway from that? To me, our takeaway is several things. He said so many great things, but I would say this, that one of the things he identified in their research was that here's what happens to us when we're trying to get free of something. We do our own thing, trying to get free, and we don't. And so I think, well, I'll just try what I just tried, but I'll try it harder. And we find out, you know what, even if we try harder, we can't get free. So how do you get free? Is freedom truly a possibility? And the answer is absolutely it is. We can get free of anything that's got its claws into us. I'm going to share with you briefly 3 things, and then we're going to have a time of ministry together. But here's number 1, how to get free. 1, identify, I need help. You can't do it alone. It's a great verse in 2 Chronicles chapter 7 and verse 14. We look at this verse a lot of different ways, but I want us to read this verse and look at what God's telling us. He says, "And my people who are called by my name, if they'll humble themselves." That's the starting point. Humbling yourself, realizing that I can't do this alone. Humble yourselves and pray and seek. This translation's out of the Amplified Bible, and I love this phrase. Crave, require as a necessity my face. Think about that. Crave of necessity my face. In other words, this face-to-face encounter with God. Not a theory, but with Jesus. God who came and died on a cross for us. The God who gave his life for us. The God who made freedom available to us if we'd surrender to him face-to-face. come into that encounter with God. He says, if you'll do that, if you'll seek me, if you'll turn from your wicked ways, I will hear from heaven. I'll forgive their sin and heal their land or heal their life. This face-to-face encounter. It starts with our identification that we need help. We can't do it alone. Proverbs 28:13 says, people who conceal their sin will not prosper, but if they confess and turn from them, they will find mercy. If we'll just identify it. Number 2, I need God. Number 1, I need help. Number 2, I need God. Matthew 5:3 says, God blesses those who are poor in spirit and realize their need for him. Our need for God is no more a weakness than our need for oxygen. We were designed to breathe air. We were designed to need God. Life was always meant to be a partnership with him. Life was always meant to have him in us, filling that void and emptiness that has come to all of us through sin. We need God. And finally, number 3, we need others. Number 1, we need help. Number 2, we need God. And number 3, we need others. The writers of Ecclesiastes said it this way: 2 people are better than 1, for they can help each other succeed. If one falls, the other can reach out and help, but someone who falls alone is in real trouble. You'll notice I'm not on the platform by myself anymore. There's some folks up here. I knew they were coming. I want you to just sit back, and you've heard some messages, you've heard some scriptures. Hopefully you've heard from God. But I pray that as they minister to us in song, that God does some things in your heart. Then I'm going to come up and we're going to pray and have some time of ministry together and a time to get free.
I see shattered, you see whole. I see broken, but you see beautiful. And you're helping me to believe. You're restoring me piece by piece. There's nothing too dirty that you can't make worthy. You wash me in mercy. I am clean. There's nothing too dirty that you can't make worthy. You washed me in mercy. washed me in mercy. I am clean. Washed in the blood of your sacrifice. Your blood flowed red and made me white. My dirty rags are purified. I'm clean. Washed in the blood of your sacrifice. Your blood flowed red and made me white. My dirty rags are purified. I'm clean. I'm clean. Oh, oh. Washed in the blood of your sacrifice. Your blood flowed red and made me white. My dirty rags are purified. I'm clean. Oh, I'm clean. Oh, you made me. You washed me clean. This is the air I breathe. This is the air I breathe. Your holy presence living in me. This is my daily bread. This is my daily bread. Your very word spoken to me, and I'm desperate for you, and I'm lost without you, and I'm desperate for you, and I'm lost without you, and I'm desperate for you, Lord, and I'm lost without you. I'm lost without